On the show. It's about, well, roughly 9 months since you resigned as Foreign Minister of Brazil. That's given you a little bit of time to reflect. And with that reflection, do you now acknowledge that COVID-19 and the handling of the pandemic has been a disaster for the Bolsonaro government?
No, not at all. What happened has been the weaponization of COVID and everything that came with it by all the forces that are against President Bolsonaro's original project of basically ending the kleptocracy, the system that has run Brazil for a long time. So those people want to keep the system, want to keep stealing, want to keep their network of bribes and corruption, and they used COVID all along in order to weaken President Bolsonaro's government, and to a large extent they managed. Today the corrupt system is much stronger than it was at the beginning of the pandemic, and it has to do with the change in foreign policy that President Bolsonaro undertook after I left, under the pressure of that corrupt system.
It's a strange way of looking at what has happened in Brazil as a result of the pandemic to accuse the opponents of Mr. Bolsonaro of weaponizing the pandemic. I mean, the pandemic for Brazilians is a real fact. It has killed more than 600,000 people. Millions and millions have been infected. And famously, your former boss, Mr. Bolsonaro, dismissed it as nothing more than the sniffles. And to this very day, he refuses to get a vaccination. It suggests to many Brazilians that from start to finish, he has completely failed to prioritize protecting his own people.
It's not true. That's not true. There are many questions there. First, most of the, almost all the authority in practice for dealing with the pandemic was transferred from the federal government to the state governments by decisions of the Supreme Court in Brazil, which today acts as de facto head of state in Brazil. Everything goes to the Supreme Court and they decide everything.
I'm just wondering whether the reason you are denying the culpability of Mr. Bolsonaro is because it also gets to the culpability of yourself. You will know that the parliamentary committee investigating the government's response has recommended charges, very serious charges against Mr. Bolsonaro, but has also recommended charges against you. They want you indicted, and I'm looking here formally at the wording, they want you indicted for your strategic errors in conducting diplomacy which hindered relations with China and had a material impact on the import of necessary supplies. They also cited your part in an institutional disinformation campaign which worsened the pandemic. Are you ready to face those charges?
Because they're absolutely not true. This parliamentary commission was a sham. This is also a political instrument that wanted to weaken President Bolsonaro. They didn't find any material evidence for anything that they say, because that's not true. It's basically a rhetorical device.
Well, forgive me, but they claim that there is clear evidence that the stance you took toward China, in particular labeling the coronavirus the communivirus, with a particular emphasis on your notion that it was part of some sort of communist conspiracy to ensure that big global governance was imposed on Brazil, that, they say, led to China going slow on supplying vaccinations and ingredients for vaccination to Brazil.
It's not true. That's not true. When I left office, we had already vaccination available basically at the same rate as European countries that had started vaccination earlier and who did not depend on Chinese supplies. Back in late March, if I'm not mistaken, Brazil was around 9% of population already vaccinated. European countries had basically 10 or 12%. So, and we had much higher vaccination rates then. most developing countries.
But hang on, I want you to deal with the specifics, because the specifics are important. I mean, did you think it was clever or wise to label it the coronavirus?
Yeah, why did I label it the coronavirus? And I bet you didn't read the article where that I titled that way. I showed the book that was published by a communist Marxist author, Slavoj Žižek, saying that COVID was great for communism because together with the virus, the coronavirus, an ideological virus would take place and which would transform societies in the way that communists want. And he says, oh, you want to look at communism in the present and in the future?
Right.
Look at the WHO decisions, for example. So he clearly associates the globalist takeover that comes with
right. So just to be clear,
I didn't talk about any plan.
I thought perhaps it was an unfair portrayal to see you as somebody who saw the WHO as part of a sort of globalist communist enterprise, but maybe you do. Yeah. Is that what you really think?
It's what Marxists and communists tend to think. I do think.
Excuse me, if I'm not wrong, Karl Marx was not involved in the creation of the WHO. I'm really struggling to understand what you're even talking about.
I'm talking about it because Marxist authors today, very influential Marxist authors, talk about WHO and other multilateral institutions as an instrument to create what they consider to be the communism of the 21st century.
I'm looking at the impact your running of the foreign ministry and Mr. Bolsonaro's running of the presidency has had on Brazilians. I'm looking, for example, at the response of 300 of your own colleagues. Now, these aren't kleptocrats or corrupt Brazilians who are worth millions of dollars, but these are 300 of your colleagues inside the foreign ministry who signed an open letter denouncing you, their boss, in March 2021, talking about the serious harm that you were doing to Brazil's interests, demolishing Brazil's international reputation, putting Brazilian lives at risk, vandalizing relations with China and the US during this terrible pandemic. That was the judgment of your own colleagues in your own ministry.